Welcome to the first ever episode of the Momentum Switch podcast. Uh, I'm a co-host Ayush, and my other co-host Nishant is here, and we're going to be. And the subject of this podcast is football, basketball, and we also discuss some other sporting events and just general life in just general life. And so to start off, I think we should kick it off with the upcoming NFL playoffs. Those are going to happen uh, this weekend. And let's go through the wild card games. Of course, Green Bay and Kansas City won't be playing, but let's go through. So yeah, Nishant, who you got?
So for the Bills Colts game, I got Buffalo. I really feel like Josh Allen's really improved throughout this year, and with the Bills' offense playing the way it is, and their defense also playing pretty good recently, I don't
But
see them losing to a close team.
their defense is average, and then how are they gonna stack up against that run game and Jonathan Taylor?
Uh, yeah, I feel like Jonathan Taylor might still put up a lot of stats, but their defense actually has been playing pretty good against the run recently, and with Josh Allen probably scoring over 30 points, I feel like even if the Colts play good on offense, they won't be able to stop the Bills offense.
So you're saying it'll be a shootout, sort of.
Not necessarily, but it'll be a pretty high scoring game in in the 30s, like 20 to 30 range, I'd say.
Who do you think gets the playoff start for Indianapolis at quarterback?
Um, Philip Rivers.
You want to go with the veteran guy there? Nice.
Yeah, I think so because his experience, even though he hasn't really made it to Super Bowl, I feel like his experience throughout the years really helps him. What
All
do you
right,
think
let's
about this game?
this game. I think well, Buffalo has obviously all the momentum, but then again, even Indianapolis, although they haven't been as good as Buffalo, they're still a playoff team. They still got 10 wins. We shouldn't sleep on them, but I also think it'll be a Buffalo win by maybe a good two touchdowns, maybe. Yeah, that'll be a fair estimate.
Yeah.
All right. I think we should move on to the next game. Let's go. Let's pick in the AFC. This one will be a playoff rematch. Titans Ravens. Who you got?
I can see it going both ways, but I'm gonna pick the Ravens here. I feel like the Ravens have a lot of potential going the distance, and with Lamar Jackson at the helm in their run game, I feel like they can beat the Titans.
I mean, Lamar Jackson. He's 0-2 in his playoff career, even though he won a unanimous MVP last year. And in the playoff game he had, where he lost to the Titans last year, I think he had like 360 yards passing and 150 rushing, which is 500 yards of total offense in a playoff game, and they still managed to lose. And that too, it wasn't a close game. So, I mean, how much can Lamar Jackson do? Last time he put up 500 yards, and okay, let's take a reasonable estimate. Say Derrick Henry doesn't go for 200 yards again, and the Titans play a bit worse this time, which I'm not going to say is for sure going to happen, but let's say it happens. Are we really going to count on Lamar Jackson bringing up 500 yards again?
Uh, I don't think we're gonna count on that, but I think that really just shows how important it is to get an early lead. And with the pressure of being down, it really makes you play differently, and it makes you go for fourth downs, and just changes the way you play. And I think whoever takes the early lead might win this game, especially in a really run dominant game.
What about the mental edge? Because the Titans not only beat them last year, they they had a matchup in the regular season in which in overtime the Titans went to Baltimore, beat them there, and even before the game there were some fireworks where I think they were on their logo or something like that, and their coaches were getting ready to they were having a confrontation. So how do you think the mental aspect plays in?
I think the mental aspect can be pretty big, actually. And I think the Ravens really need to overcome that, especially that Lamar Jackson is actually a really young player and he still doesn't have much experience. Lamar is actually younger than Joe Burrow, and that's actually pretty interesting. And also, the Titans have home field advantage, which doesn't really make that big of a difference right now, but it's still better than playing Baltimore, so that can also help out the Titans.
Yeah, but home field isn't exactly the same home field as it used to be, right? Because, no fans.
Yeah, but I still feel like playing on your home field with like the Titans like logo around you and just the area you practice, not having to travel, it can still help you out, you know?
Home cooking. Yep. So how about another game that's pretty close, could go either way, is the Ravens, not Ravens, Browns and Steelers. They're both in the same division. Steelers have been, the historically six Super Bowl best team in the division, possibly the league. Where did that one go?
I was actually thinking Browns, but thinking more at it, I actually think the Steelers are probably going to win this game because um, although the Browns, I just read a stat recently saying that the Browns actually have a negative point differential, even though they're in the playoffs, which just shows that the games that they're winning, they're probably winning pretty close, and the games that they're losing, they're probably losing pretty badly. Even though they're 11-5, I feel like they're not as good of a team as people think they are, and especially without Odell Beckham, even though with that good run game, I feel like their offensive firepower isn't there, and Pittsburgh will win this game even if it's like an ugly defensive battle.
Isn't it interesting that they play better without Odell Beckham, even though obviously he's a top talent at receiver? How come they play better without him? That should never be the case.
Yeah, I think so too. I think maybe Baker Mayfield either focuses on Odell Beckham too much, or
Maybe
maybe
that
some of their
dilutes some of the carries from the run game, which is more efficient or something like that.
yeah. And then nowadays you can see the Browns they play more of a play action type of offense. Before they were trying to focus too much on their passing, and also maybe some of the talents of the other receivers weren't discovered because Odell Beckham was kind of taking too much of the catches and yards and stuff.
I think I think this game will just come down to who can make less mistakes, honestly. Because let's look at the Steelers on offense. Now, even though the Browns aren't bad per se at defense, but they're nothing special or elite on that side of the ball. But the Steelers have the worst. They have the worst running game in all of football, which doesn't really help. And then on top of that, they've got an old quarterback. Don't have the best passing attack either. And how much can you, quite frankly, ask Ben Roethlisberger to do at this stage in his career? He's not. He's not Superman. He's not going to be winning the game for you, like putting the team on his back. But then on the flip side, they've also got a good defense that should be able to contain the Browns defense, which could make it pretty close. And therefore, I think it'll just be whoever makes less mistakes, and that comes down to who do you trust more, uh, the run game or Baker Mayfield from the Browns or Ben Roethlisberger. I've honestly got to go with Ben Roethlisberger. I've seen him in the playoffs too much, and this is obviously Baker's first rodeo. We'll see how he performs.
Yeah, just with a young team like that, and even an inexperienced coach, I just don't see it like going that way. What do you think about
He's
the
not an
Rams and Seahawks game?
inexperienced coach. You can't forget he's not going to be at the game.
Oh yeah, so he has COVID, right?
Yeah,
Um, that can actually make them like there's just a delay, but I also feel like without your coach, that can really hurt you because with all the practice you got
It's, I
and
think it's just a
all the
confidence thing, honestly. It's not the coaching thing because it's not like all the plays they drew up and all the talent and the offensive line being dominant, all that was just going to go away. That's not going to happen. The only thing is, those late game play calls and stuff like that, where you want your experience, you want your talented head coach to be making those calls and not some backup.
yeah. And also, the Steelers have a better coaching staff, in my opinion, especially having Mike Tomlin, who's really, really experienced and has taken them the distance all the way to Super Bowl multiple times. It might show out this playoff game. What do you think about the Rams Seahawks game?
Rams Seahawks. That'll actually be a pretty interesting game. Again, it's another one of those 50-50 games. So we obviously know Russell Wilson. He's been to the Super Bowl. He's won a Super Bowl, and he's got a great receiving core around him. Two guys with over 1,000 yards in Metcalf and Lockett. The run game isn't non-existent like the Steelers either. And although I don't think, again, they used to be the worst. They were on par to be the worst defense of all time. They're maybe a bit below average now. They're not terrible. They're not a guaranteed scoring drive. And again, we don't know who the quarterback for. We don't know how the quarterback for the for the Rams is going to play out. So he could be great, or he could have the advantage that there's not as much film on him. He hasn't been playing as much as Goff, and maybe Carroll doesn't know what to do with him. And then again, it'll be the real showdown will be the Rams' number one defense versus Russell Wilson and his receivers, and I think it'll be a super close game. And like the game, like the Brown Steelers game, I'm just gonna go with the guy who's more experienced. I've seen him do it more times in Russell Wilson, and yeah, so I'm gonna go with the Seahawks, but not by a lot. What about you?
Yeah. I also think that it's gonna. We don't really know like how the Rams quarterback's gonna be playing, and that could go both ways. He could either just like have a really really bad game, or he can pretty much just go crazy and completely take down the Seahawks defense. I feel like the Rams are gonna win this in a close nail biter, like maybe like 22-20 or so, because I feel like I have a little bit of trust in the Rams offense, and with their defense being as good as it is right now, there's not too much pressure on their offense to do something crazy like another team would have to in order to sustain their uh, team to win. So I got the Rams.
Nice, that'll be
Um,
a nice
what do
divisional
you?
showdown.
Yeah. What do you? What do you think? How many points do you think the Seahawks will score against this Rams defense?
I'm gonna go around 20. Of course, it's not gonna be an exact number, but I don't see them scoring more than 30 for sure. But then again, it's Russell Wilson and DK Metcalf and Lockett. These guys, they're not scrubs either. So they should at least get 15, 22 touchdowns at the bare minimum.
Yeah. I also think the Rams should try to establish some kind of run game just to alleviate pressure off the quarterback, and um, that's really important when you have in a
But
playoff
I
game,
mean, then you're
especially.
running
So
into then you're
yeah.
running into Jamal Adams and Bobby Wagner. Not exactly the guys you want to see if you're the ball carrier, huh?
Yeah, it'll be kind of. All right. Moving on. What do you think about the Tampa Bay Washington game? I feel like Tampa Bay clearly is a favorite here, but we shouldn't count out Washington too easily.
So
What
I sort of I'm along those lines in where I stand. I think Washington is about exactly where they stand because I mean you could say yes, I think they're like 6-1 or 7-1 with Alex Smith. You could say their defense is actually pretty good, and they're also they're also you could say they're better than their 7-9 record. But let's not forget their level of competition. It's called the NFC least for a reason. They get 6 games against them, which is 6 out of 16 of the schedule, so a large percentage. I think that also plays a large role into how they fare in stats and record and all that. So I'm not going to say they're a lot better than they are because of their level of competition, who they're doing it against. But the Tampa Bay team, it's a wild card. They could easily make it to the Super Bowl, or they could get eliminated right here again. Let's not bet against the Tom. Let's not. Yeah, I was saying I'm going to go with the more experienced guy. Tom Brady is the most experienced guy you can get. He is the greatest of all time. I'm gonna have to roll with him. What about
Yeah,
you?
I agree. Um, I feel like Tampa Bay has like one of the best rosters in the league, and on both sides of the ball, and especially with Tom Brady at the helm going against Washington,
Yeah, that
I
run
just don't really
defense.
see. Yeah, I don't know. I just really don't see Tom Brady losing here, especially because he's had so much experience. He's been here before. He has so many rings. I don't think he's even like he doesn't even miss the playoffs at all. And
Let,
with
let,
that
let's look at their let's
whole
look at them
team,
this season. So the good teams they played against: Saints twice, Packers, and Chiefs. Right? Any other good teams they played against?
not that I can recall.
So Saints, I think the first time they lost by a healthy margin, but that's not too great. The next game they got destroyed. That was not a good show at all. So the Saints may have their number, but they also did destroy the Packers, who look like the best team in the NFC. And while they did lose to Kansas City, and Kansas City was looking like a god squad in the beginning, they showed some fight and they kept it close in the end. So let's not count the Buccaneers out, even for the Super Bowl.
Yeah. If you look at their like last few games as well, their offense has really been showing up. I think they haven't scored less than 30 in a few games, and Tom Brady's playing like how we used to see Tom Brady back in the past. And with Godwin and Evans back and healthy, and with Ronald Jones, with Gronkowski, with
But Evans
Fournette.
isn't healthy, right? Isn't Evans? It's possible he misses the game, right?
Yeah, actually, right. No, I meant Antonio Brown. My
Yeah.
bad. No, Antonio Brown. Yeah, so last game, Antonio Brown actually played really well, and what I saw from him was kind of what I used to see in Pittsburgh. And if he shows up that way, the Buccaneers could easily make it to Super Bowl.
Yeah, and above all else, this team they're peaking at the right time to beat like the Lions 47-7. They're dropping 40 points and looking good, albeit, the Falcons and the Lions, not the best competition, but it's not
Yeah,
bad.
and
I mean, it's
the
not bad.
Lions.
It is bad, but they're beating them by so much that you got to be a little bit convinced.
They scored 40 points in the first half against the Lions. That was a really that was a game for me that really just showed me how good of a team they actually are. Because Tom Brady had 4 touchdowns in the first half, and they just benched him for the second half. And their defense played so good that they only let 7 points. It just showed how good on both sides of the ball they are.
Yeah, let's move
So
on.
yeah,
Let's move on to the final wild card game that we've got in the NFC and in the playoffs that we haven't discussed. That would be, wait, what is it? Again, forgetting.
Bears Saints.
Bears Saints. You're right. And again, the Bears, to me at least, are arguably the worst team in the playoffs. Them in Washington, 1-2. And the Saints, they lost to Kansas City, and they're not looking as formidable as they were earlier. But they used to have a top. They used to have the best defense, and they were looking nice. It's Drew Brees' final run, most likely. How do you think? How do you think this game's gonna go?
Um, Me personally, I actually believe the Saints have the most stacked roster in the whole NFL. Just their weapons all around their whole team is just insane. Trey Hendrickson is actually out, which could hurt them in their run stopping and pass rushing. But I still feel like their team is miles ahead of the Bears, and especially Drew Brees, Alvin Kamara, and Michael Thomas have only played 10 quarters together this season. I feel like when they're all gelling together, they are not going to lose, and this game especially, it should be an easy win for them.
I think the only chance they've got is the Bears have a good defense. Maybe they can hope to contain that explosive Saints offense, and then maybe run the ball and expose the Saints defense a little bit. But other than that, no, it should be a blowout for the Saints. They should be able to walk out of this one easy.
Yeah, I think this game is probably going to be the most blowout game of the week. But yeah.
Highest margin of victory. Yeah, so I
All
think
right.
yeah. What are you saying?
Just do you want to move on to the NBA?
Sure. So let's start with the Western Conference. What better team to start than the Phoenix Suns? They're atop the standings and the nice young team. Are they legit?
I actually think that they are legit. The way I watched one of the Phoenix Suns games, and just the amount of passing they have around their team, and the mentality that Chris Paul brings to the team. If you've seen the trend, wherever Chris Paul goes, they play really, really well. And even if Chris Paul doesn't put up the statistics that you would think from an elite top 15, top 10 player, I feel like just the impact he makes on the floor is really important. And he's also mentoring Devin Booker. He's DeAndre Ayton starting to turn into what we always wanted him to be as well. And the Suns are looking like a really deep team. What do you think?
So you brought up an interesting point about how Chris Paul is a player who probably is his impact is greater than what his stats may show. What are some players uh, who you think are who are some players you think have this sort of thing where their stats don't tell the whole story, both in a good way and a bad way?
Um, One player that I can think of for sure that is Bam Adebayo. His stats kind of don't really show how good of a player he actually is. I actually doubted him when I first started watching him, but then as I started watching more Heat games, I really saw how much of an impact he was on the floor, just on both sides of the ball. And he's one of those players that statistics don't actually show how good he actually is as a player. One player that statistics are pretty high, but he's not as good as people think he is Zach LaVine. He's more of a scorer that puts up 25, 26 points per game, but he's not like at that level where you would consider him a top 15, top 20 player yet. And until he shows his defense and leads the Bulls to more wins, I don't really see him
Well,
at
you
that
said
level
top
yet.
15, top 20 player. How about top 15, top 20 scorer? Does he fall in that category?
Yeah, I think so, but scoring isn't all basketball is, and you need to make more of an impact to get a win. And uh, although he's a really good shooter and really good dunker, he's just not at the level that some people think he is.
I think this his offensive game has two sides of the coin. One is, if you go strictly by who's the top 15 scorer just using production, he scores like what 25, 26 points a game. That should get him in the top 15, top 20. But he's on a Bulls team which, for the past couple of years has not been good at all. And they may have a good start this year, but it's only been a few games. They still look to be a pretty bad team this year. I think that also factors in where he's basically on his own, and it's not that hard to score when the guys around you aren't exactly the most talented.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, I mean, he's obviously a gifted scorer, but I just don't see him at that level that some of the other players are at.
Yeah, he's
Are there
not
any
bad.
players
He's just
that?
not what you'd expect from a 26 points per game scorer.
Yeah, are there any players that you think don't really fulfill their stats in terms of wins, or the opposite?
So in terms of wins, that would have to be uh, star players of the Washington Wizards, both of them, because they should be a playoff team given the talent on their roster. They've got some young guys, star-studded backcourt. Russell Westbrook gets off for triple doubles. He's been famously called out for being a stat pattern and all that. And I mean, those arguments aren't completely unwarranted. I wanted to hold out for a bit, but he's not the most efficient, and he puts up great individual stats and rebounds and assists better than any other player in the league, to be frank. Uh, but I just don't see him as good as the stats would suggest because the stats suggest he's the best player in the league. And Bradley Beal also, I think he scored 60 one night, scored 40 last night or something. He's he also he also might be scoring a lot in the same way as Zach Levine. You'd be led to believe he's the best scorer in the NBA, but I don't see him in that upper echelon yet. I see him maybe like a tier two guy, but he's not bad by any chance, but he's not in that he's not a tier one scorer yet.
Yeah, I agree. What do you think about a team like the Boston Celtics that just continues to improve every single year, even though they seem to be losing players?
Are they really improving this year? I mean, obviously, the argument you can make, the reason they're improving every single year, it's been like 1 or 2 years, and I don't think they improved this year. But that's mainly because they got a young duo in Brown and Tatum, and the losing players I think is just a natural part of getting them more touches and more shots, so the young guys can evolve and become better. So I don't think they're doing anything magical. It's just younger players fulfilling their potential, or at least getting closer to fulfilling it. I don't think that's the reason. The Celtics, their problem is quite frankly depth. Kemba Walker, Smart, and a few other guys back up Tatum and Brown, who are their best players. I, that won't serve them too well in the regular season when you need a strong bench to play a lot of minutes. But in the playoffs, when you'd only have five guys on the court. Why not have the five best guys? It could serve them well then. What about you?
Yeah, I agree. Although I feel like without Gordon Hayward, they miss out on some of that scoring in the playoffs because although you have only three guys that I feel like can actually like put the ball in, like just take the ball and score whenever they need to, and I feel like that might not be enough. I feel like with Gordon Hayward last year, he was able to alleviate some of that pressure, and also he's a really good passer, and I feel like losing him was a big mistake, although he had a really expensive contract.
How
Um,
many how many give these how many give the guy the ball and get a bucket guys do you think the Celtics have?
Me personally, I would say three. Although Marcus Smart is good enough, I feel like he's not at that level where you can trust
I
him
think
that
he can
much in the
create his
playoff
own
game.
shot. I think he can, like, you can maybe give it to him on a catch and shoot or something, but like 6 seconds on the shot clock, you can't ask him go create your own shot or something. But three
Yeah,
guys
especially
should be enough, right?
yeah,
Three
but
guys should be enough.
um, yeah, but I'm not saying like the three best guys. I'm just saying like some of the other teams have a little bit more depth, and that's what you kind of need. And like I wouldn't say like 10 players, but I'd say like 7 players. And then Kemba Walker, he didn't really like show himself to be that good during the playoffs last year, and I kind of expected more from him. So we really need to see Jalen Brown and Jason Tatum take a step up when the playoffs comes to town, I guess.
Yep. So another Eastern Conference team, probably the biggest wild card in the entire NBA is the Nets. What are your thoughts on the Nets?
Me personally, I was actually pretty surprised when I first saw them because I wasn't expecting much from them, especially Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving coming back from injury. But the way they looked in their first few games when they were both playing was pretty good. Um, especially the Eastern Conference isn't as like talented as the Western Conference, and I can see them taking it the distance if they both stay healthy. Healthy. What about you?
So of course they lost Spencer Dinwiddie, and you know they you saw Kevin Durant back in the preseason. You got some glimpses. They opened up the season with two like 30 something point wins. They looked somewhat unstoppable, quite frankly. Um, of course Dinwiddie is a big loss. They still got Karis LeVert and a nice depth to back up those two guys. I really think the biggest question is the health and relationship of their two stars. If they can both stay healthy and on the court, and while on the court, if they don't have any personal problems or like a power struggle type thing, they should be able to get the job done. I think the Eastern Conference should be theirs for the taking. That's certainly their ceiling. They should be contending for a title with whoever comes out of the West. But I honestly could see this team being like a second round exit if something happens. And while this team has shown a lot of promise, a lot of Kyrie Irving teams, especially the ones in Boston, have either played better without him or underperformed with him. So I guess it's more of a let's wait and see for them.
Yeah, I agree actually. How do you think this team stacks up to a team like the Heat, who just made it to the finals last year?
Quite well, actually, because they've got the Heat have a lot of scoring options and playmaking. So they've got guys who can sort of create their own shot, like Tyler Hero and Dragic, and then you've got some sharpshooters in Duncan Robinson, and then guys like Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo can even bring the ball up, create their own shots. I feel the Heat have a really balanced roster. They don't have like a some insanely talented star, even though Jimmy Butler and Bam, they're no slouches either, but they're not, those top five, top eight, whatever superstars at this point in their career. So they're just really balanced, and it depends on how much their young guys improve. But I think the Nets should take them, especially if Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving get enough time on the court together and they get their feet in the water, they should be able to take the Heat.
Yeah, I feel like the Nets are more talented, but the Heat have a culture and they have more hard nosed defense in terms of Butler, Iguodala, Adebayo. They all play the level of defense that you don't really see from a typical NBA player, and um, that can really help in the playoffs. But I feel like if the Nets keep their locker room healthy and they have good relationship, they're gonna go the distance, take the East.
Yeah, the real wild card for the
Um,
Nets, the real determining factor is just their off the court relationships and stuff. The Heat, are very stable and very like you sort of see like the camaraderie and brotherhood between those guys. You just don't know if that's going to happen in Brooklyn, and if it does, they should be able to. They should take the Heat, but if it doesn't, they may be their own worst enemy.
yeah. Do you think any team will contend with the Lakers coming playoff time?
Well, that's a really interesting question because when you think of contend, you first think of their conference rivals, and if it showed anything last year, I thought that the Trailblazers could at least take them to 5 6 games. They were completely overmatched. They dismantled the Rockets as well, and they didn't get to go against the Clippers, but they also dismantled the Nuggets, who beat the Clippers. they got better, but I think I think with some teams they could give them a shot. I don't think anyone is going to beat the Lakers. They're still my favorites to win the West and also the title. But a team like maybe even the Suns or the Magic or someone, not Magic, Mavericks, if they're able to hit their shots and get things going, I honestly think they should be able to win 5 6 games again against the Lakers. But no, no team should be taking them down. What do you think? Who's the king of the West in your eyes?
Yeah, I think it's the Lakers just because they've just completely improved on a championship team, right? And there's not going to be any power struggle either because it's LeBron, and people kind of understand how great of a talent he is and what he brings to the game. Um, the Mavericks, they're looking really really good, especially when Chris Kristaps comes back. But I don't really their defense isn't up to caliber yet, and I don't see them beating Lakers as of right now. But they have really good potential. Um, Same with the Suns. I feel like they're just not as talented as the Lakers. Uh, I just don't really see any team that really could beat the Lakers right now. But you never know with injuries or some kind of issue that comes up. So
I
yeah,
get that on paper, they won the title and they have the most talented roster. But if the Clippers taught us anything last year was that you can't just throw the most talented roster together and expect them to win. It also has to do with the cohesiveness of the unit and sort of even like an identity of the team. Last year, the Lakers were a defensive team. Of course, they could score and put up points, but they could defend and stop the other team from scoring as well. All the guys were at least somewhat good defenders. Anthony Davis, All NBA. Uh, LeBron was good. Dwight and JaVale were nice. Maybe they aren't as good on the defensive side of the ball, right? And that could hurt them.
yeah. Although Montrezl and Marcus Gasol are obviously an upgrade over the last two centers they had, Marcus Gasol isn't as good as a defender as he used to be, and Montrezl Harrell isn't really that great of a defender, although he brings the energy. Um, they are way better offensive players, but I feel like that's not what the Lakers need right now, and that could come to hurt them in the playoffs. With LeBron on your team though, there's just that amazing identity that almost every LeBron team has, where there's no like issues in the locker room from what I'm hearing, other than the Kyrie situation where he kind of wanted more power.
But I don't
Um,
think you can blame that on LeBron. Kyrie, the
yeah,
same thing happened in Boston, so it might be safe to say LeBron's not the problem. Kyrie is.
yeah, exactly. LeBron's kind of like LeBron's such a great person. You see him always doing great things for the community. He seems like such a good teammate. Like Anthony Davis bonds with him so well. Just even after coming to the Lakers last year,
Yeah. How about the other
he
LA team?
the
What do you think of the
Clippers.
Clippers?
Um, right. I actually feel like they've improved from last year in terms of their roster, but um, I just don't think that they're as good as the Lakers, and especially with all the height that the Lakers have over them and the playoff experience that LeBron has. Um, although Kawhi has that playoff experience too, I just feel like the Clippers haven't proved to me yet that they're able to beat the Lakers, although their roster can compete with them.
I mean, we're saying playoff experience that Kawhi has, but I don't think we can take the two Finals MVPs and the two rings at face value, to be honest. Because the first Finals MVP, he was 22. You could easily make the argument he was even the third or the fourth option on that team, and you could certainly make the argument he didn't deserve the award. But they gave it to him. Let's take it. Although it's not a bona fide, he deserved it, a clear cut award choice. And also in 2019, in his playoff run, he hit a clutch shot. I'm not going to take that away from him, but he shut down the Greek Freak, which it's sort of been shown that there's a blueprint to shut him down. If you got long and versatile defenders, even Miami did it this time. You can shut down Giannis also. And 2019, we all knew he wasn't going to win the title if Kevin Durant and Klay Thompson were there for all the games. So I think it's possible. I don't think you can say he has the same playoff experience and the same the winning aspect that those two MVPs and two rings might suggest.
Yeah, I actually agree. It just also shows how how the NBA looks at LeBron. Like Iguodala and Kawhi kind of just won Final MVPs for guarding LeBron, even though they had good offensive series. It actually just shows like how good of a player LeBron actually is. And Kawhi, I feel like he could have easily lost that series to the Sixers. And he kind of got lucky in that shot, even though it was an amazing shot. The Warriors obviously would have beaten him, and so could, and also his title with the Spurs. He wasn't really like that. Wasn't really his title. That was more like the Spurs' title, like Greg Popovich's title in a way. And
The team
he hasn't
effort.
really, yeah. It's for him. He needs a full team to make it that far. Like it's not just. If you look how good of a team that Raptors team was, looking back at it, it kind of just showed that it wasn't just him that was like carrying his teams to the finals, and
Yeah, he didn't
it
do
just
more of
shows.
his part. He was like a puzzle piece in a way, like where he just fit into the piece assembled by the front office and he played that piece really well. Whereas someone like LeBron, he's not only like the biggest piece of the puzzle, he's also like, rearranging other puzzle pieces and he's a lot more than what you he's the real deal. Whereas Kawhi is, more of a I'll do my part type guy. And I don't
Yeah.
think the Clippers, even though they got Serge Ibaka, who's a really great pickup, you could even say an upgrade over $6 million a year hero, but they didn't address their possible fatal flaw, which is playmaking. They don't have a guy who can uh, distribute and get the ball to everyone else. How do you think that's going to hurt them?
I think that could hurt them, but at the same time, their coach Tyronn Lue said he's trying to make Paul George and Kawhi just the starting point guards and try to lean off of them. I feel like that could kind of hurt them because those guys, like Paul George especially, he is an ISO player, but if you watch a lot of his plays, he's also a really big catch and shoot guy, and I feel like with the playmaking, especially that year with the Thunder, him and Westbrook gelled pretty well when he had the third MVP year because he was able to get a lot of catch and shoot threes off Westbrook. He's like one of the best catch and shoot 3 point shooters of all time. And last year, the Clippers really put him in a lot of ISO situations. And if that's going to happen again this year, that could prove to be fatal for them in the playoffs.
But one thing I remember listening was how him and Doc Rivers said something about pick and rolls and stuff like that. And there was some stat where Paul George was like, "I think I should have done more pick and rolls," and the stats showed that he did the most pick and rolls in his career. We all know Kawhi was really the catalyst of that offense. How much more can he rely on the two stars? And let's be honest, these two guys are great defenders, shooters, and all, but they're not playmakers. They're not the guys who will get everybody else involved, and above all else, they're not vocal leaders either, where they will galvanize and inspire the rest of the team around them to get the job done. So I think they're not destined towards a disappointment because this time we'll all be more cautious of anointing the Clippers as the favorites, but I don't think they're gonna take down the Lakers. I think they might not even make the Western Conference Finals.
Yeah, I feel like the West is starting to go in a more younger team direction, whereas like the teams like the Jazz, the Mavericks, the Nuggets, and the Suns, they're all starting to become really good teams, and even more younger teams are starting to come up, and it just shows like how it just keeps on evolving, and this is like that time where the cycle is changing between like this generation of players and the next one in a way where we're gonna start seeing a lot of these teams and a lot of these stars start to go down, whereas the younger players are going to start coming up. Yes. What do you
So
What do you think
yeah, go
about a
ahead.
team like the What do you think about a
Yeah.
team like the 76ers that's they're leading their conference right now and they're playing extremely well from what we've seen.
Well, first of all, I want to say Daryl Morey signed there, and big surprise. They look like one of, if not the best team in the league. Big surprise. They brought in, Seth Curry, who shoots the lights out, and they got rid of some bad contracts and did all that. If you ask me honestly, Embiid and Simmons, they don't work too well on their own. Simmons, you really need to have him as you need to get him a guy like Klay Thompson or a 3 and D, like a guy who can play without the ball, which Joel Embiid cannot. And Joel Embiid, he can shoot the ball, but he's not like Karl Anthony Towns or something where he shoots the light out. Of course, Ben Simmons is quite literally not a shooter at all, and you can complement that with Seth Curry and all these guys all you want, but at the end of in close moments and stuff, being played the hardest defense you can. You can't run your sets as easily. You really need to go more into ISO mode. You need a guy who can create his own jump shot. That's what we've seen that plague. We've seen that limit what the Greek Freak can do in a lot of games. I just don't think either of these guys can create their own shot well enough to make them the the top team in the East.
Yeah, I was thinking about this. What do you think about a trade like Paul George and Serge Ibaka for Embiid and Seth Curry?
That would be pretty interesting because I think then the would probably for the Clippers side they'd match up really well with the Lakers. I think the Lakers have the edge in the supporting cast and the bench, but Embiid and Anthony Davis are still somewhat comparable. Same with Kawhi and LeBron. They're close enough that on any given night could go either way. And then again, Lou Williams and the rest of the guys on their bench, they're not scrubs either. So, well, I'd give the Lakers an edge. It, I like their chances more, especially with. I want to talk about Paul George for a bit. I don't think even if you were to take an average of his points or whatever, I don't think he should be considered as good as he is because sometimes he scores 40 points, he looks unstoppable. You're like, man, is Paul George the best player in the game? And then some games, he looks like, why is this guy even in the league? He shouldn't have a job. And that uncertainty where you don't know what you're going to get from him should not merit him like all-star top player status because how can you say this guy is as good even if you average it out where one good game, one bad game, you sort of want to know what you're going to get. Like with LeBron, you're at least going to get 20 points and you have the chance of getting 40, 50 or something. Kawhi exemplifies this. He's a model of consistency. But Paul George, you just never know with him.
Yeah, I feel like people don't realize like how important confidence is even at the highest level. I see a lot of his interviews where he talks about how he's not confident in a lot of his games, and that can really hurt him. I feel like he has a lot of talent. Like he's one of the most talented players in the whole NBA on both sides of the ball, but um, he just doesn't have the mental aspect that you really need in the playoffs, and that can uh, kind of look bad, especially like how he looked in Game 7 at the end of the game, where he just wasn't being like his typical self, and he hit that backboard 3 point shot, and I just didn't really see that coming from him, and it just shows how important your mentality is. Players like LeBron, his to keep that mentality going up for all the pressure he has throughout his whole career, it just shows how great of a player he is.
So another guy that has a lot of pressure on him this year, you can argue he's the best player in the league. What about Giannis? What do you think about him in the Bucks?
Um, I actually think that picking up Drew Holiday was actually really great, especially when you're playing a team like the Nets, who would have Kyrie Irving in the playoffs, or playing a team like the Celtics, so he can guard Jalen Brown or Jason Tatum. And um, if the way you saw him lock up Damian Lillard in the playoff series, where the um, Pelicans beat the Blazers a few years ago, I feel like that was a really great lock,
That's a
like
really
defensive.
comparable scenario, actually, because he had Anthony Davis. Drew Holiday had Anthony Davis with him, and they and Anthony Davis is somewhat comparable to Giannis in a way. So yeah, I get that analogy, that comparison. Sorry.
Yeah. Do you just going back to that Pelicans team? Do you remember when they had DeMarcus Cousins? They took the Warriors to 5 or 6 games without
No,
DeMarcus
no,
Cousins,
no. They
and
got swept they got swept that series, man.
really,
Yeah, they swept the Trailblazers, and then after that, they got swept by the Warriors. I mean, there were some close games, and they did look like a pretty solid team, even without DeMarcus Cousins. But they got swept. Not saying much, the Warriors were the best team of all time, but they got swept. But they had Rondo that series also. That's when playoff Rondo made his return.
yeah, yeah. that team really gelled together really well. And the Bucks team right now, I really like that they're just the way the team's built around Giannis, and if they're able to kind of build an offense and try to prepare for the playoffs better than they have before, and if their role players can play better than they did last year, I really feel like they can take it all the distance. At the same time, if you look at the way a team like the Heat were guarding him with Bam Adebayo and Jimmy Butler, you can also just I can see them losing pretty early, like in the second round. So it can go both ways.
I
They have a
mean,
really high
I
ceiling and a
don't
really
think
low floor.
their offseason was super productive. I mean, of course, it's ultra productive because of the supermax extension, locking up one of the best players in the NBA. But other than that, I think Drew Holiday is he's not a true second option if you ask me. If you put him on a championship winning team, he would be the third option, an elite third option at that, probably the best third option in the league. Same with Middleton, but I don't see them having a true second option. Like you look at LeBron and Anthony Davis; those are both possibly in first options. Same with KD and Kyrie, first and second option, elite ones at that. I don't think Drew Holiday is like that. You could maybe at the end of close games, something, give him the ball and let him make a shot or two. But it's not like he's going to give you 30 a game or something. He'll play some good defense, get you some points, play make. But he's not a superstar. He's a fringe star, and I just don't see the Bucks winning either this year,
Yeah,
unless Giannis changes something up.
we really need to see Chris Middleton step up. Like when he plays against the Celtics, if you see his like stats, he really plays really good. And you know the way he shoots, right? He's like a 54-90 player. He has all that potential for scoring, but for some reason, every season in the playoffs, he kind of just lets the fans down. And this season, he's been playing pretty well, but I really want to see him sustain that in the playoffs so he can show that he can really be an option. Giannis has had too much like pressure on his shoulders, and like when the team stops him, like if his role players aren't like playing that well, he doesn't really have anybody to like go to. He doesn't have that Kyrie that KD has, and that can actually really hurt him, like you just said. So yeah,
I don't think that even applies because it's not like he can go to him. He won't even be the go-to option because think about it. At the end, if there's a close game or something, you're not giving him the ball and telling him go isolate, get me a jump shot. He's not even the first guy where you're like like for example the Nets where you feel they have a help defender waiting and you don't want Kevin Durant shooting a double team shot, but he'd still be the first option. Quite frankly, I wouldn't even have Giannis as the first option in those late game scenarios where you need a jumper. So what do you think about that?
yeah, yeah. If you need a 3 pointer, you're not going to be honest. That's where you kind of realize that he's just not that great of a shooter, and you got to go to Middleton or Holiday, and until he really needs to improve on his 3 point shot, and he's got to keep on shooting more and more of them. Also, even if like you want a 2 pointer, it's pretty predictable that way. Like their Bucks are probably gonna throw up a tip to him, or they're gonna try to run a play. He's always isoing. He can't really
I mean, he's
get a lot of
athletic. He's athletic, but in like a tip scenario or something like that, there's so many other athletic guys in the NBA. Like you just
yeah,
like in that scenario, you don't care about speed because you're honest. They're just gonna tip it to him, put up another big, and hope he can deflect it. That's not too hard to game plan against.
yeah, and also like he's not really like a person that gets assisted to. He scores almost all his baskets on isos and driving to the hoop, and you can probably just like take a step back and guard him from the free throw line or something if they just need a 2 pointer because you're not really gonna see him try to shoot a three to win the game.
What about another conference finalist team from last year? They haven't had the best start this year, but their players are playing all right. Their best players. How about the Nuggets? What are your thoughts on the Nuggets?
So the Nuggets, I actually saw them playing pretty good last night against the Mavericks, but the Mavericks beat them without Kristaps, and I kind of nowadays I kind of see them as kind of as tier behind the Mavericks, and their team it looks really good on paper and it's really stacked, but they've been losing some pretty close games. One thing that's a good sign is that they haven't really got blown out at all this season. I think all their losses are by like 10 or 11 or less points in that, and they blew out the Trailblazers twice in a row, which could kind of help them, I guess.
I don't
And
think the
they just
Trailblazers are a really good team though. So if you ask me,
yeah,
then They're not contenders. They're borderline playoff teams like last year. But I think the Nuggets, they're a really interesting team because they just all fit together. But they lost Jeremy Grant, who's looking pretty nice actually in
Yeah.
Detroit, and he was a pretty big part of their playoff run last year. And I don't think they got better this offseason. They probably got worse. Maybe you can account for some growth from their young guys, their stars, maybe a little bit because they're still young. But I think this team isn't better than it was last year, and it just remains to be seen can they pull off the same level of play that they did last year.
Yeah. Also, Paul Millsap's getting older, and he's not really looking like his old self back when he like first joined the Nuggets or when he was on the Hawks, and that can kind of hurt them because especially like Jeremy Grant, their power forward options kind of going down, and Michael Porter Jr. kind of fills that scoring role, but he doesn't feel that like defensive hustle type of guy that Paul Millsap and Jeremy Grant kind of were, and that can kind of hurt them in the playoffs. Their team is pretty was looking really good on the offensive side, but I also don't really see them as that good of a defensive team, especially with like Jokic, who's he's a pretty good defender, but he's not like that good of a defender. And then
He's not Anthony
Michael
Davis
Porter,
or anything.
yeah, exactly, and their team
And
just isn't
if
that
you've
good on
got
the
people like
defensive
Michael
side.
Porter Jr. and Jamal Murray who aren't they're not terrible on defense, but they're somewhat liabilities. You need like a big man
Yeah,
like Anthony Davis or someone who can clean up for them, and if they get blown by, he can sort of blow up the pick and roll or do something like that. Jokic is not that. He's a great playmaker and all, but he's a good defender at best. You brought up Paul Millsap on the Hawks. Where do you have the Hawks this year?
Oh, I'm actually pretty impressed with the Hawks. Uh, I like the way they really handled their offseason, improving their team around Trae Young. It really just shows how devoted they are to winning and improving and trying to make the playoffs. And um, I really like their like depth around their team. Their big men are pretty stacked. Their Trae Young's obviously going to be a top 20 player for the foreseeable future unless he gets injured. And although I saw one story recently talking about how John Collins was a little bit unhappy with Trae Young's like the amount of touches Trae Young gets, and that can kind of maybe hurt them if they have locker room issues. But for right now, I'm really seeing them improve as a young team, and I don't really see them doing that great in the playoffs. They're going to lose in the first round, but I feel like that's okay because they're just improving every single year, and they're eventually going to get there.
But
What do
is
you
it
think?
possible this team is the real deal? Because again, small sample size, but they have the best offensive rating and just the best offense in general in the NBA. And of course, defense, they're not spectacular, but they've got some guys in like DeAndre Hunter and Rondo who can step it up on the defense side of the ball, Clint Capella. And I think this team, while I also do think they'll lose in the first round, they won't go down without a fight, even against a top team like the Nets or the Bucks or something. And maybe they can make it to the second round also, quite
Yeah,
frankly.
yeah, I really like the way they've surrounded Trey Young and John Collins, who are like pretty bad defenders, with decent to good defenders around them, so that it kind of masks their bad defense. And the production that Trey Young and John Collins prove on, like show on the offensive side, so that like they're just gonna, if you surround them with good defenders, they're gonna be a pretty good team for the foreseeable future. And the way the Hawks have kind of built their team around Trey Young, I feel like they did a really good job, and they have a really high chance of doing pretty good even in the playoffs. What do you think about like how the NBA is kind of putting?
Before we move on, I want to ask you something about
Yeah,
the Hawks. So, if you remember the old Hamptons lineups with the Golden State Warriors, where they'd have elite defenders and they'd cover up for Steph Curry, who wasn't a bad defender, but he's 6'3" when the other guys were super tall, long, and just great defenders. He was the chink in the armor for that defensive team, for that
yeah,
team on the defensive side of the ball. Do you think the Hawks can emulate that to a lesser extent on
yeah.
on defense?
Um, yeah. Especially because if you watch Trey Young, he's such a good playmaker. He kind of elevates the team. So if you bring in a bunch of those 3 and D type guys, and um, it just I feel like that'd be a
No,
really
no,
really good
on
fit around
defense,
Trey
on
Young.
defense.
Yeah, yeah. Like I'm saying is like on defense, like if you bring in all those 3 and D guys, like Trey Young will get kind of masked, and like although they can probably ISO on him, if you if you have like so many good defenders on your team, like the other switches will all be like tough defenders, and I feel like that can really help out Trey Young, like how the Warriors did with Steph Curry. I
So
feel like Trey Young's kind of on that path that Steph Curry was when he was younger. I feel like the Hawks right now are kind of like the 2012, 2013 Warriors, and I wouldn't say they're gonna be as good as the Warriors, but like they're kind of at that level that the Warriors used to be at.
So, if the 2018 Rockets showed us anything, it's how to beat that stacked Warriors defense. It was just expose Steph Curry as much as you can in ISO situations. Of course, they were really well geared to do it with James Harden, probably the best ISO player ever. Do you think other teams can do that on the Hawks if even if they try and do this? Because since 2018, mainly because of James Harden, the league has taken a larger shift towards ISO ball, and it's not like the Warriors where they have one weakness, who isn't even that great of a weakness, and then all defensive teams, defensive player of the year type guys to cover up. Whereas the Hawks might have two or three weaknesses on the court at a period of time, and while their defenders are good defenders, again, they're not all defensive team, defensive player of the year type defenders. So how do you think ISO ball is going to play on that, play a role in that?
It can actually play a really big role. I feel like the Hawks players really actually need to also improve on defense. Like I feel like they're young players and they have a lot of potential because, especially John Collins, who's like an athletic freak. Like if you watch him play, he's like his dunks are insane and he just has like the arms and the length to do it. He needs to develop that defensive IQ, and that comes after experience. Trey Young, on the other hand, though, like he already has the IQ, but he's like 6'1", 6'2", and he just isn't that athletic. He's more of a 3-point shooter and a passer type guy, and I feel like teams can really expose him on defense. So the Hawks have to somehow develop a scheme where like he's not going to be ISO as much as, for example, Steph Curry was in the Warriors. The Rockets also kind of surrounded James Harden with a bunch of shooters, right? So whenever the Warriors try to double team him because Steph Curry's on him, he'll be able to like pass it out to PJ Tucker or Trevor Ariza and get an open look for three, and that really helped them out. So yeah, that could be a way of being in. All right. So last thing before I wrap it up, what do you think about um the the Utah Jazz and how they've been playing so far? They're 5-4, and they've been playing pretty good, and they just beat the Bucks recently. And
I don't have too much to
what do
say
you think
about
about them?
Utah, man. So Utah, I mean, if you look at just how they fared in the, last year in the playoffs, the they went to seven with the Nuggets, who beat the Clippers. So you again, not a very pretty crude way of analyzing, but you could make the argument they're better than the Clippers. But the West is stacked. This team has Donovan Mitchell's nice. Rudy Gobert is fine, but he gets exposed in the playoffs. He's really an average, if not below average,
What
center
do you
in
think about
playoffs.
Supermax? What do you think about the Supermax he got?
What?
What do you think about the Supermax that Rudy Gobert got?
It's fine. We have to keep in context their location. Did he deserve it? No. Pure basketball protected? No way. He gets exposed in the playoffs. He can't score the ball. He rebounds decently. He's a good defender. Pretty great, actually. I'm not going to disrespect him that much, but he's not the best defender in the league. He's probably not even top five in my books. But there are the Utah Jazz, and if you're there's no free agents going to Utah. Nobody decides, hey, I'm going to spend my summer in the freezing cold of Utah. So they really have to play good. They just got to draft young guys and maybe even overpay them to keep them to go away from to stop them from to going to better markets. So his extension from the Jazz's perspective is perfectly fine.
Do you, do you think the NBA is kind of unfair in the sense that bigger markets, kind of like Miami and LA and New York, kind of get all the major players, whereas teams like Milwaukee and Utah kind of don't really get those big signings?
Of course, that's not even a debate. Other ancillary factors, like like other opportunities, like in, for example, Los Angeles, all the movie stars and most a lot of the most famous people in the world are congregate in that small area. So without a doubt, that's an advantage. But the league is doing stuff like the Supermax, and also the draft plays a big role. So while it is a disadvantage if you compare to other sports um, like soccer, in that scenario, uh, the team with the biggest budget always wins because they always get the most. There's no draft type system where bad teams can excel, and I think while it's unfair, it's not impossible for small market teams. Teams like the Spurs have proven that small markets can also succeed. It just is. It's significantly harder to do it. You just need a model of consistency, and if you're successful enough, let's not forget we can say these aren't top tier free agent destinations, but the Spurs did sign LaMarcus Aldridge in 2014, and he probably was one of, if not, actually no, he wasn't LeBron, but he was probably the second or third biggest name in that free agent class, and he still went to a small market. So it's not impossible, but yes, it is an unfair advantage given to larger market teams.
Yeah, I agree actually. Wait, what you just said?
Yep. All right. So we're going to wrap it up here. Thanks for listening to the first ever episode of the Momentum Shift podcast. We're we're glad you could listen to this. Stay tuned for more episodes. Thank you.